Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Learn Ulysses, a video tutorial series by The Sweet Setup. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How are you?
Good. It's good to have you back, Federico.
Well, have me back on the show, but I was actually with you in Chicago.
I know. It was very weird. You were not on the show, but actually I had seen you like less than 48 hours beforehand.
Yes. You recorded the show as I was on a plane going back to London and then going back to Rome.
Right.
I missed doing the show. It's been part of my life since April, and I'm so used to doing the show now, but there was just no way. I was given a presentation at the Release Notes conference, and then I was on a plane, and I had an internet connection on the flight, but of course I couldn't do a podcast from a plane. I think there's people who've done that before, but
really? On a plane?
I think so. Honestly,
wow.
I think so.
Wow. Yeah. You could have interviewed Mike.
I don't think we actually even talked to each other. We were just so tired. And Mike was editing podcasts. What was I doing? I was listening to music and...
Did you play Stardew Valley?
No, I worked. I think I had an internet connection. It was really bad, but I actually managed to get some writing and some email done. So today, I guess on this week, we're going to talk about how many apps you have on your Mac.
We are. We went through, in the process of getting ready for the show today, I deleted several.
Really? Did you?
Yeah, because I was thinking of you, and I knew you'd give me a hard time, and I don't have a count for you.
Do you have a problem on the Mac as well?
No, although I do have a bad habit of trying things out for Mac Stories and then just leaving them on my drive. I had two copies of Twitterific.
Don't say for Mac Stories. That's totally your bad habit. It's no.
It's all Mac Stories.
Sure,
That's the problem.
Sure. All right. But seriously, what do we want to focus on today?
I think we want to focus on geeky utilities that we use on the Mac. And people will be surprised to learn that you actually do use a Mac once in a while, like right now, right?
Sometimes, like right now. And I actually I talked about this on Connected. I went through a bit of a cleanup moment that lasted a few hours a few days ago. I wanted to make my Mac desktop and the menu bar pretty again. So I took a few hours to clean up a bunch of things, reinstall some apps, delete some other apps that I was not using anymore. And I had this idea of why don't we talk, and especially, you, John, you use a Mac every single day. I use a Mac a couple of times a week when I do podcasts. But why don't we talk about these, these maybe lesser known or geeky or really powerful utilities that we use on a daily basis to get our work done on the Mac, and which might be useful for our listeners that do not work on iOS but use a MacBook or an iMac or a Mac Pro if there's still some of those people. So why don't you start, John, and tell me about Alfred?
So Alfred is more than just an app launcher. That's one of the things I use it for every day. You set up a hotkey, and for me, it's Command Spacebar. And then you just type into a text field that appears, and you can do all sorts of things, whether it's launching an app or looking up a contact. Maybe you want to find a particular file or folder on your Mac. There's a lot of things you can do. One of the things that I like the best is you can set up custom workflows. And one that saves me an enormous amount of time is one that I set up for the Mac Stories website. So what I do is I type MS space, MS is for Mac Stories, space, and then a search term. And what it does is it takes the Mac Stories URL that does a search inside the search field on the website, and it appends those search terms to the URL and kicks off a search. So I might be in Ulysses and think, oh, I want to link this story or this review that we did a while back. So I just immediately do Command Spacebar, MS space, and then some search terms. And it takes me, I use spaces on my Mac. So even if I'm not in the space with Safari, it kicks me over to that space, runs the search, and finds me a list of results. And I can find the article that I want really quickly, grab the link, and then go back to Ulysses with a Command tab.
Oh, nice.
It saves a lot of clicking and looking, because especially if I don't have Safari in the same space as Ulysses, I don't have to go find which space has Safari. It just kicks me over there, and it's a one Command tab back to Ulysses. So I use that every single day, probably a dozen times. That's how I find most of my links when I'm referencing things that are already on Mac Stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never really got into Alfred workflows, mostly because I think they came out at a time when I was investing into editorial workflows, which had a really different UI from sort of editorial has this top-down approach on iOS, and Alfred has a more sort of almost mind map like approach to
Yes.
creating workflows. But I've always found it fascinating. I think there's a huge community of users making these super advanced Alfred workflows.
There are, and my Mac Stories one is actually fairly simple, but it's something that I need to dive into a little more deeply and come up with some new things, because I'd like to be able to do things like, for instance, do a screenshot, edit it, and then upload it to Rackspace so that I can drop it into a Ulysses document. That should be possible, and I just haven't gotten around to doing it. But those are the kind of things, usually multi-step type things that you would have to do with files or apps that you can do pretty easily with Alfred.
Nice. What about Better Touch tool? Because I remember I used to use this custom utility for the trackpad on my MacBook years ago, but I know that it's the app is still around and it's got more options than ever.
It does. And this one is an app that I use, at least at the moment, exclusively with Logic, because Logic is an app that I use to edit this podcast, but it's not designed for podcasts. It's designed for all sorts of audio editing, including music. And I found when I was learning Logic that it was really easy when I was using different command keyboard shortcuts in Logic to hit the wrong one, because I would be looking at the timeline and trying to get everything lined up and not looking at my hands, and I'd hit something wrong and it would do something terrible in Logic. And I could always undo it with Command Z, but I found the more I kept my hands off the keyboard, the better off I was. So what I did was I remapped a bunch of keyboard shortcuts in Logic to the trackpad. So as I'm editing, I'll have one finger on the space bar to play pause, and I'll have another one on the command key. And then I have a series of things like command 2-finger tap. It cuts the track. So I find where I want to do the cut. I do command 2-finger tap and it cuts it. And then I have another one for selecting all of the clips forward in the timeline so that I can drag it around and make room for, a sponsor break or something like that. So I use Better Touch tool for that, and it's been great because it reduced, first of all, it reduced a lot of the repetitive motions of reaching for various keyboard shortcuts that weren't always that comfortable, and it also sped up the process and avoid errors that would be inadvertent, where I might graze some key that did some function that I didn't even know what it was, and then I'd find out later that I got to go back and fix that. So it's been a big benefit for editing the show.
So how do you associate a custom gesture with a specific menu option from Logic? Do you need to type in the name of the action that you want to perform?
What you do is you open up the Better Touch Tools preferences pane, and you can add specific apps to the sidebar. There are a lot of system ones that are already pre-populated there, but you add an app. So I added Logic.
Oh, okay.
And then what you do is you go through and you just assign various gestures to keyboard combinations. So I have Shift F for select forward is a 2-finger tap, and then a 3-finger tap is to deselect everything in the timeline. And then just a regular 2-finger tap with the command key modifier is trim. So it will splice a section in 2 pieces.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So Federico, tell me a little bit about Bartender. This is an app I use too, but I see that you've got this listed as something that you use on the Mac.
I like to pretend that I'm a fancy Mac user, and I know I'm making modifications to the system. I know what I'm doing. So I used to be I used to be a Bartender user years ago when the first version came out, probably in 2012, 2013 maybe. And it used to be that if you wanted to clean up your Mac menu bar, because you had too many menu bar apps, there used to be a time when it seemed like every single Mac developer was making a menu bar application.
That's still very true.
It's still okay, so that's still true. So Bartender came out, and it allowed you to collect all of these menu bar icons into a single icon. And clicking that icon opened up a second menu bar. So the idea was you keep in the main real menu bar just the icons that you use all the time. And then all these other optional utilities that also put an icon in the menu bar, but that you don't need to see all the time. You keep them in the second menu bar the bartender opens. And that used to be the original version. I think Bartender 2.0 also built upon that design. But Bartender 3, which I think came out a few months ago,
Yeah, it was pretty recently.
it changed up a lot of things. So now you don't have a second menu bar anymore, but you still get the icon in the system menu bar. But when you click it, it expands in line. It doesn't show you a drop down second additional menu bar, but it basically floats on top of the system menu bar. And I've talked to some people, they don't like the fact that it's not a second drop down that opens, but that it temporarily takes over the system stuff. But I actually quite like this design because it accentuates the idea of these are temporary icons that I don't need to see all the time. Just let me click through, do what I need to do, and then bartender goes back to the original menu bar. So yeah, I keep it on the right side. I have 5 icons right now. Notification center, which cannot be removed. Bartender cannot make that kind of system modification. And I have bartender, the system clock, copied, which is my clipboard manager, and 1Password. And everything else is in bartender. The app is really easy to use. You open the preferences, you automatically see all the apps that have an icon in the menu bar, and then you can decide, I want to keep this icon in the menu bar, like the Apple, the system one, or I want to always show it in the bartender menu bar. And you can also do stuff like show me the icon in the main menu bar, so temporarily override my rule of keeping the icon in the bartender bar only when there are updates. So like you can do stuff, for example, like if Dropbox is updating the files in the background and the icon temporarily changes, show me the icon for 15 seconds only when changes are occurring. So that's a nice way to make sure that when apps are doing stuff in the background, you get them out of bartender for a few seconds and then they go back in.
Yeah, that's exactly how I use Bartender. I use it for Dropbox. I use that feature for Dropbox so I know when things are syncing, but usually I have it hidden.
So I like the new direction. I think it's a nice implementation of taking over the Apple menu bar, but I understand why some people don't like the way that the app changed.
Yeah, I think there may be underlying issues with macOS that require that because I know towards the end of the last version of Bartender, there were some issues with visual glitches that would occur when that drop down would show up and then parts of it wouldn't go away. So I actually like it a lot myself too. The other thing you can do, you can hold down the Option key, I think it is, and reorder your menu bar items by just dragging them around when you have Bartender running, which is a nice way to kind of put them in an order that you like. I got shamed for my menu bar when I was at Release Notes by Stephen Hackett.
Rightfully so. I can only imagine what your menu bar looks like.
I cleaned it up a little bit, but
Sure.
it's not 4 or 5 items.
And in fact, the next app you're going to mention is a menu bar app.
I am.
What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. And I'm not a big fan of moving a lot of apps to the menu bar in general, but I do like this app because it's called Tyke. And I just heard about it maybe a month ago from Dermot Daly on Twitter. And it's very, very simple. All it is a text field for dropping some text temporarily. But what's really nice about it is it only holds plain text. So as a result, if you take some rich text out of, say, the Notes app or Google Docs or off the web or whatever it happens to be, and you drop it in there, it's the same as putting it in TextEdit and doing the convert to plain text menu option. So it's a great way to just kind of strip out all formatting if you want to paste some text somewhere. And a lot of times if I'm sending out a bunch of emails that have the same body text, I can use Text Expander, but sometimes I don't need something quite as powerful as Text Expander. All I really need is a snippet of text that I can keep up there and go back and forth and copy it every so often. So that's what I use it for. I don't use it a lot. It's probably the newest addition to my menu bar, but I do appreciate especially the ability to strip out the formatting.
I'm also going to mention 2 menu bar utilities.
Okay.
One of them I keep in the bartender menu bar. I only have it because of the functionality that it enables in the background. It's called Boom. It's an audio boosting utility on macOS that basically allows you to make your MacBook speakers louder. That's what I use it for.
Right.
It increases the system audio beyond the level that macOS is traditionally set. and it does other things, like it's got an equalizer. I know there's some other extensions that I could use, but really I just use it for the slider that allows me to make my MacBook louder. That's all I use it for. And it's really nice. I've been using it for years. It's now a version 2, I think, and it's, works nicely. The other app that I use is called Statusfy, and I found this utility somewhere via Google search a few days ago. It does one thing really nicely. It puts the title of the song you're listening to in Spotify as plain text in the menu bar. That's all it does. I was looking for a simple widget that allowed me to see the name of the song that was currently playing in the Spotify app in the menu bar. And all I could find were these utilities that put like a jewel case of a CD on your desktop
Yeah.
with like music controllers, like mini players. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted some plain text in the menu bar.
Welcome to the 90s, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't want a jewel case. I just want some text. And this app does what I need. To be useless when Spotify is not playing because you get like this icon in the menu that I don't want. But as long as Spotify is playing, you get this plain text and it works and it's free to download. So no harm.
Thanks to Learn Ulysses for sponsoring App Stories this week. Learn Ulysses is a brand new video course from our friends at The Sweet Setup. We've known the team at The Sweet Setup for years. One of the things they're best known for is picking the best apps in certain categories. Their pick for the best writing app on Mac, iPad, and iPhone is Ulysses. Ulysses is one of our favorite apps too, and an app that we use almost every day at Mac Stories. One of the things I love most about Ulysses is that there's a lot of power just under its simple, easy-to-use surface. It's easy to get started, but there are also some incredible power user features that make it more than just a simple text editor. Things like document organization, exporting, filtering, and more. That's why the Sweet Setup created their Learn Ulysses course. It's a video course that gets you up and running with all the features of Ulysses from beginner to advanced. This course will help you take full advantage of the Ulysses app so you can stay on top of your ideas, your writing, and more. I've been using Ulysses almost every day for 2 years and thought I was an expert, but I learned some new things from Learn Ulysses too. The Sweet Setup is doing a special deal just for App Stories listeners. For 1 week only, Learn Ulysses is 20% off. So go check it out now at learnulysses.com. That's learnulysses.com. There'll be a link in the show notes too. Thanks again to Learn Ulysses for supporting the show. I've got a few more that I'm going to do in rapid succession here. One is another one that I've just started using relatively recently, which is called Shoddy. And Shoddy is a screenshot app. So if I take a screenshot on my Mac, what this app does is it essentially brings the screenshot functionality that you find in iOS 11 to the Mac. So the screenshot goes into a little window down in the lower right-hand corner, very similar to the way it does on an iPhone or an iPad. And I can then click a number of different buttons on there. I can do a preview. I can also mark it up with arrows and text and shapes and that sort of thing. And when I close the window by clicking the little X, it gives me the option of saving it or deleting it, which is great because it helps me to keep my drive clean of too many screenshots. So it's handy little utility.
Yeah, it looks really nice. Especially because I'm a fan of course, the way that iOS 11 deals with screenshots. So having this ability on the Mac, even if it's so easy to take screenshots on the Mac, they go onto the desktop. But being able to have the little floating preview, it's really handy.
Right. I usually with screenshots let them go into a Dropbox folder because Dropbox has that functionality built in, which is nice. And I don't mind that so much for when I'm working on an article. But say I'm doing a really quick screenshot and want to send it to a friend in messages, it's much easier to use Shoddy and just take it from Shoddy, drag it into the messages window, and then close the Shoddy window, which deletes the screenshot, so I don't have a bunch of random screenshots all over my Dropbox folder.
Very nice. Very nice.
So the next one is Moom, which is by Manytrix, and it's a Windows manager. I typically use it to maximize a window to the full size of the screen. I'm not a big fan of running apps full screen, but I like to have the window filling the entire screen sometimes. And then I also use the feature that lets you throw the window to the left side, the left half of the screen or the right-hand side of the screen, so I can look at things side by side. It's about as simple as that. The app can do a lot of different things in terms of specifying exactly how you want the windows to look and where they're placed, but I don't use that. I just use it for maximizing and moving things to the left and right for the most part. And the third one is Fluid. Fluid is a single purpose browser that you can create little web apps out of. And my main use for this is Toggle. What I do with Toggle is track my time. And with Fluid, I can set it up so every time I open my Toggle app, it opens up the browser, logs me into Toggle, and I can track my time. And it even lets you create a custom icon. So what I did was I took the Toggle macOS app, which is probably worse than the iOS app, to be honest, which is pretty bad. And I did the right click show package contents, and I dug through the resources folder and found their icons, copied their icons out of their desktop app, and put them in my Fluid app. So I have a very nice Toggle icon to go with my Toggle app that I created for myself, and that's how I track my time on my Mac.
Very nice. I sort of miss this ability to make these custom web apps and maybe even change the CSS, that kind of stuff with custom script
Right.
on the Mac. I used to do this with Fluid, with Firefox, back in the days of what's the name, Grease Monkey, that
Oh,
allowed
right,
you,
yeah.
yeah, that allowed you to apply custom style sheets to websites.
Sure.
That was really nice. I want to mention this app that I use mostly on iOS, but that I also keep on the Mac because I like the fact that it syncs with iCloud. And it's copied, and it's my favorite clipboard manager. I've talked about this a bunch of times. I wrote about it on the site. The reason I like copied is that, well, first of all, it can be opened from the menu bar, and this is one of the two apps that I'm looking at right now in my menu bar, along with 1Password. But the reason I like copied is that it's simple to use, it's easy to use, but it also packs a surprisingly amount of features and power. For example, you can organize your text clippings and image clippings in lists. So I have different lists for Mac stories and app stories, for example, of stuff that I'm frequently pasting and moving between different apps. But also you can set up rules. You can set up custom filters that match a specific text string or a specific domain from Safari if you're clipping an article from a web page. I love the fact that all the clippings that I create on iOS, where you can even do stuff like custom JavaScript workflows in Copied. But all those clippings that I create from my iPad and from my iPhone, they sync back to the Mac. So that when I'm doing stuff on the Mac, like because there's some limitation on iOS that I need to use my MacBook to fix it, it usually involves dealing with Safari and a web page that does not behave correctly on iOS. All my copied stuff is right there, and I can just click on the menu bar and copy what I need and paste it somewhere else. I mostly use copied on iOS. Honestly, all my scripts, my custom automations were done on iOS. But the fact that they sync back to the Mac and I still have the same feature set and the same UI, it's just excellent.
Yeah, that's a great app, and I've used that quite a bit on the Mac as well. I want to cover really quickly the apps that I use to edit app stories. And we've already talked about Better Touch Tool, which I use within Logic to do the editing. But first of all, things start with recording. In recording, we both use Audio Hijack from Rogue Amoeba, which is a great app because what I do is I have a custom setup for app stories. It's recording my microphone straight to my Dropbox where we have a shared folder, and it's also recording the Skype call as a backup simultaneously. Once we're finished and I have your file, I drop everything into Adobe Audition, and I use that for just one thing, and that's loudness matching, because you and I have our settings a little different, and we're at different loudness levels, and Adobe does an incredible job of matching those so that we sound roughly the same. Once I'm done with that, I drop the audio files into Isotope R6, which is an audio scrubbing app. It does all sorts of things, from taking out mouth clicks where you might smack your lips a little bit, taking out plosives. There's probably 20, 30 different filters you can use, but I mainly use it for taking out background noise, if there's any kind of hum from a fan or maybe your air conditioning, even if it's really subtle in the background, I can take that out. And it just generally cleans up the vocals as well. And that I've got that set up so that I can take our files, since I've tuned it for your environment in your apartment and my environment here in my basement, so that I just take the files, I load them into the app, and I walk away. And it does each of the filters. It probably, for the half-hour episode, it probably takes 20 minutes to process all of our files. And I'll either go have dinner, or I'll work on the show notes, or whatever it is, and eventually it finishes, and I can drop them into Logic where I do the actual editing before exporting out and getting the show ready for publication.
So the final app that I wanted to mention, of course, I don't have as many as you, John, but this is a really nice one that I don't think a lot of iOS users and Apple TV users actually know of. It's called Beamer, and this app allows you to quickly and easily AirPlay a video either to your Apple TV or also the Google Chromecast by simply dragging and dropping a video file from the Finder into this app. There's basically no installation required. You download Beamer, you unlock the full feature set, and then it looks on your network, and if it finds a Google Chromecast or an Apple TV, you're basically ready to go. And then you just pick a video file, like home movies, for example, and you drop it into the Beamer UI, and it starts streaming on the Apple TV or the Chromecast. And that's it. And it takes care of all the transcoding if necessary. It supports a bunch of video formats, and you don't have to add anything to iTunes. You don't need to use Plex or stuff like that. You can just drop it into Beamer, and it goes off to your TV, either via the Apple TV or the Google Chromecast. It's really nicely done.
Okay, well, I've got just one more, and that is Softorino YouTube Converter 2. And this is an app that lets you drop in a link from YouTube and download the video in very high resolution. And I use it occasionally. I will save a video that I want to have locally, but more often than not, what I'll do is if Apple publishes an ad or some other video that we want to cover at Mac Stories, I'll download the highest resolution version I can get. I'll open it in QuickTime, and I'll do a screen grab. It's a great way to get a hero image for an article that's a lot higher resolution than you could get if you were just trying to screenshot something in YouTube itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of an oddball use case for it, but it's also great if, for instance, you want to collect music videos of your favorite band or something like that.
Yeah. So your use case sounds much better than what I have to do every time of gently and carefully scrubbing the progress bar on my iPad until I get a non-blurred or non-motion shot from a YouTube video.
Right.
It happens all the time that I need to scrub the tiny puck of the progress bar just right so that I can take a screenshot of a video. This sounds much better.
Right. You want that specific frame in the video to use as the image, and it's really hard to get. And whether you're scrubbing on an iPad or you're scrubbing with your mouse in Safari, but if you have it opened up in QuickTime, it's a lot easier to get exactly what you want, and that has been very useful for me. Well, Federico, I think that's it for this week. What do you think?
Yeah, you are the Mac expert here. So
I guess
if you think we gave out some hot tips to our listeners and some useful suggestions, then it's your call. Do you think it's a good show? Do you think these apps are useful?
I think we're ready. I think that those are hot tips and hot takes.
All
so I think that we've probably got more that we can share later. But for now, I think we've done a pretty good job of giving people something to chew on and think about for the next week or so.
All right.
So thanks again to our sponsor, Learn Ulysses, a video tutorial by The Sweet Setup. We'll be back next week with another episode. You can find the show notes in your podcast player of choice or on the web at appstories.net. And as always, you can find Federico and me writing at macstories.net and for Club Mac Stories. And Federico is at Viticci on Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.